I'm going to explain to you what assimilation and dissociation mean in the world of logosynthesis. When we come into the physical world, the three-dimensional world, we take on a body. So that's the material form of what we call the original self with a physical boundary. In this moment in time, we are in full contact with essence. And what else is this field around us, which is what we call the personal space. And those of you who are familiar with the logosynthesis sentences will also know what we call non-me energy. So that's the space that is ours with a boundary, represented here as a compromise. I found a cable, which is symbolically a good metaphor because it's all about energy, electricity and energy. So that's what I'm thinking. And what we call non-me energy. So we have our personal space and we have space that is not ours. Now, from the moment we touch ground, so to speak, we begin to collect experiences. And they might be great experiences in that we have someone who looks after us, right? So we have caretakers and they meet our emotional and physical needs. So in that moment in time, this person from the outside world, from the non-me energy space, leaves an imprint or a representation of their being, of this experience in our personal space. And when it's a great experience, it's not an issue because we can assimilate it, we can work with it. It's a good experience, all good. When the person goes away, we still have that memory, that imprint of that person, of that experience, which is great. It's that supportive, right? And then we have experiences which are neutral. It can be a neighbor, it can be a car passing by as an experience that is not fantastic, not great, but it's also not bad. And we have plenty of those as we move along in life as well. Now, what gets interesting for us in logosynthesis are the experiences which are not great. So this can be a little thing, but it can also be a big thing, right? So some of us have very traumatic experiences and we all collect experiences that are not great. And as a baby, I use the word a little bit loosely these days, I've learned, because it can seem very traumatic to a young child, even if, for example, a parent turns their back on them and goes to another room, and in that moment, the baby feels abandoned or lonely and cries. And so that experience is not great. And what happens then is that you can't, as a baby, you can't assimilate it. You can't process it. You don't understand what's going on. And so you can't, because you can't process it, what happens in that moment is that a part of yourself splits off. You lose contact with essence in that moment. And a part of yourself splits off as a frozen part and gets stuck, so to speak, with what becomes an introject. And that piece, because you can't process this, it's like it's frozen, it's stuck in your energy space. And what that causes is this enormous pain. It's unbearable pain. And as a baby, when you have a pain, and even as as we grow up, we do everything we can to avoid pain. And so this pain, this red ring, represents what we call the first order dissociation. And because it's unbearable, we are very creative at developing what we call second order dissociations, or mechanisms to cope, to defend, to deal with this pain so that we don't feel it. This second order dissociation can take the form of many things. And as a baby, for example, you scream, you yell for attention, and if you're lucky, you get it until you don't feel the pain, right? As we grow up, we develop all sorts of mechanisms to deal with pain. So some classical second order dissociations, ways of coping, they're ones that look good on the outside world. in our societies and ones that don't look so good. So anger is a very classical one. Addictions, to whether it's to work, which looks positive because it's like you work hard, but also addictions to smoking, to food, to drugs, alcohol, just so you don't feel the pain. That's suppressing it. But there are also some, so-called good-looking coping mechanisms, such as pleasing other people. So I was taught as a child to smile a lot because when I pulled a face, I was told that's not, doesn't make people happy. So I learned to smile a lot. I still smile a lot these days, but I'm also very aware that it was a coping mechanism, because when I didn't smile, I didn't get the love that I needed or wanted. So anytime we feel rejected in any way, we want to be, or let me say, we all want to be seen, acknowledged, working hard, being perfect, performing, all has to do with seeking acknowledgement, appreciation, confirmation, love at the end of the day, right? And so all these things are actually coming from the place, typically, of not having been seen or not getting enough love, or being told, and I think many of us, many of my clients certainly recognize this, is performing because behaving, like you're taught to behave at school, to be good enough. And when you're good enough, when you bring home the good marks, when you behave, then you're told you're a good girl, good boy. Being strong. Little boys are told typically, and this is one of our gender issues I think we're dealing with, is because boys, and it's not men's fault. I think that's a big pet theme of mine, but we're told, boys are typically told not to cry. They're told to be strong, and so if they're not strong, they're not given the love. So we're taught all these things, and we behave accordingly in order not to feel the pain. What also happens here, by the way, which I forgot to mention, is we have, because it's an introject, the introject here is the trigger, and there's frozen energy from the outside world. I really want to emphasize that the safety you create as a guide is enormously important. That is the first place. So it might take time. You don't jump into it and just throw sentences at your client. You explore the personal space with them and their personal museum, which I'll explain separately what that is, and what's causing them, why are they showing up in your practice? What is it, what's activated it, and create enough safety so that they're ready, and you cannot push that. They're ready to get in touch with their emotions. That takes, I think one of the beauties of logosynthesis is you really listen to the client, you really listen to where their energy is bound and where it's in flow. And the level of distress, the 0 to 10 scale, is when they're in contact with the pain to identify the trigger, and how distressful it is indeed one of the one of the starting points before you go into the processing using the 3 sentences. But the stability of your working relationship, the working alliance, is incredibly important. Without that, don't go anywhere. So how do the logosynthesis sentences work? The most important basis is exploration with your client and your patient. When they come to you, typically it's because something has activated the pain, or this second order dissociation is no longer working for them. We talk about identifying, localizing, and neutralizing in logosynthesis, right? So you identify the trigger through exploration, you identify the trigger and what's activating the pain, and you localize it by asking the questions, which are the meta B questions, around how do you know when you have a reaction that's met a question, what are you reacting to? So you localize it by asking questions around where in the room, where in the space do you see it, feel it, hear it, etc. That's the localizing piece. And you neutralize with the sentences. Now the sentences are the following. I retrieve all of my energy bound up in this X, which is the trigger. That is when you take back the frozen energy that's bound up here to yourself, to the right place in yourself, without your needing to know, without the client needing to know where it goes. I retrieve all my energy bound up in X and take it to the right place in myself. The second sentence is I remove all non-me energy related to this trigger, related to this X, from all my bodies, all my cells, all my bodies, all my personal space, and send it where it truly belongs. And that's the part that is the non-you energy, right? The non-me energy. That goes back out of your personal space. And then, because there's frozen energy attached, there's energy bound up in the reactions as well, we have the third sentence, which is I retrieve all of my energy bound up in all of my reactions to this X and take it to the right place in myself. So that resolves, and that's the neutralizing. And when that is, taken back, you take back that energy that belongs to you, automatically the second order dissociation also resolves itself. So that's how the three sentences work. What is absolutely, and I think this is fascinating, and clients often say this to me, is after the sentences, after you've processed it, the representation doesn't just disappear, but what happens is it becomes neutral. So instead of being one that one reacts to, it becomes a neutral representation or imprint. And clients often say, and you will know this too if you've experienced logosynthesis, is that you have a sense of the memory doesn't disappear. And we wouldn't want that to disappear, because that's life, shit happens, excuse my French, but we can deal with the shit. So it's still in our system, but it's neutral and we don't react to that anymore, or not so much. Now, what I'm going to explain here is also what activates us. So as you can imagine, right? We accumulate all sorts of, as we grow up through life, we accumulate all sorts of great experiences, also the neutral experiences, but as you can imagine, we also, and not just imagine, you know this for a fact, we accumulate all sorts of negative experiences in life as well. And as that happens, we lose more and more contact with essence, because each time, there's a frozen part that gets stuck to all these representations and all these triggers. We have what we call our personal museum, because when we grow up, we collect, and these introjects we call are things, our experiences we collect in our lifetime because of the people we meet and because of experiences we have. And beliefs and patterns, all of that are introjects. So ideas around success, for example, we have our ideas accumulated through our experiences, what people say to us, what our parents say to us, what we experience at school, these lovely experiences with our dogs and family and furry friends. This is a champagne cork given to me on my 50th by my parents. It was a bottle of champagne that I opened on my birthday. So, that is part of my personal museum. And we have our ideas about food, we have our ideas about beauty, we have our ideas about money and what that means, we have our ideas about love and relationships, and all our experiences and what time means, all of that. So we have in our lifetime, we each have this incredible personal museum. Now, what happens when we meet someone and who activates. Now, let's take an example of a manager or a partner. This person comes along in our life and they say something, they do something, or they look at you a certain way and you react. You react because what's happened is something about that, about them, about the experience, triggers or activates one of these old introjects. In that moment, you show up the way you did then, with all your reactions, all your thoughts, all your patterns, and you behave because what's happened is this old introject has been triggered, and you show up, you behave that way with all of that, and react towards this person in, with all that old behavior. And this person has no idea what they've done or what they've said, and they're dealing with this. And then what happens is, they have their own personal space, right? They have all their experience, their personal museum. And so they have their mechanisms as well. And so you have this ping pong of this, all these mechanisms going on. And so you can imagine, right? So, and this happens unconsciously. You're not aware of this unless you do your self-work. And this person is not aware of it unless they do their self-work. That is one of those moments where clients or patients can come to you, or might come to you as well, or you do your own self-work and recognize what's going on for me that I reacted that way to this person. Now, the beauty of doing self-work and logosynthesis is as you look at it and you recognize what might have triggered you, and you use the sentences as we did before, or you work, do your self-work, and you resolve this particular trigger, what happens is you show up differently because it becomes neutral. You show up differently, and when you show up differently, you react differently. Your connection with this person, your interaction with this person who originally triggered you shifts. And they start to, it's like, okay, some things happen, and then they start to shift. This is why self-work is so incredibly important. And as a guide, no matter whether you're a coach, a therapist, or a psychiatrist, your job is to, number one, do your own self-work. We say that you've always got to be half an hour ahead of the client, meaning you typically you cannot take a client any deeper than you've done your own work yourself. So you need to have done your self-work. The beauty is when you do your self-work, your relationships shift. Not only that, but when you slice what we call the salami, it's like, I think that a nice metaphor that Willem also uses is like a plate warmer in restaurants, right? You have plates, and the plate warmer, you take away one plate, another plate shows up, right? And so, and it's a process. This doesn't happen, all in one day. It takes time because, and I believe life is a spiral. You sometimes you meet the same issue, but you're at a different level. So what happens when you do your self-work is you're actually cutting the salami slices, and that's why your pieces of paper, bit by bit. And the beauty of that, and I really have experienced this myself, and I am so grateful for that, is you become, they won't all go away, so let's be realistic and leave a couple. Is what happens over time is that you get more and more in contact with essence. Every time you do some salami slicing, we're going to be selling a lot of salamis here, is you get more and more in contact with essence. When you are more and more in contact with essence, things start to really move and you feel more and more in flow. Your connection with time shifts. Your relationship with money shifts. Your idea of success moves. You're no longer so dependent on the outside world. It begins from within. Your relationship with food shifts. And last but definitely not least, your sense of love shifts in that there becomes more and more love in your life. it's truly a beautiful process, and it really does begin with a lot of self-work. And as you can imagine, cleaning up your own space means that your interactions with other people will also only get better and better. And so I can truly highly recommend doing self-work, and logosynthesis has proven for me to be one of the best and most effective and elegant ways to go about it. So I hope this has been an explanation that has helped you gain a better understanding of how logosynthesis works, and thank you for watching.